All right, man, peace. You know, brothers, Tom Brady, the superstar quarterback of the New England Patriots, to me, he encapsulates the true definition of the term company man. I mean, this dude, he reminds me of one of those Hydra agents from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Before he divulges any secrets, he's willing to die. He'll take the cyanide capsule and everything, and he'll let you watch him die before he divulges or gives up any of the secrets of the New England Patriots Mafia. And as we know, it's been revealed recently, particularly over the last few years, that the relationship between Tom Brady and Bill Belichick has been a bit estranged, to say the least. I think that it's starting to come to the forefront that their relationship is strictly a working relationship. But ever since Tom Brady has come to the understanding that Bill Belichick was planning to replace him with Jimmy G. Spot Garoppolo, Tom Brady has decided that he's going to fight fire with fire, but he's not willing to go all the way with it because he knows that in order to maximize whatever's left of his career, he still has to be relatively willing, at least in public, to kiss Bill Belichick's ring and to show obeisance to him. So he recently has come out and stated that he believes that Bill Belichick is the greatest coach in NFL history. Of course, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
All right, guys, entering his 19th season playing for Bill Belichick, Tom Brady's certainly grateful he's been aligned with the greatest coach of all time for his entire career. Tom, tell him.
I think he's the best coach that's ever coached in the NFL. You know, I feel very privileged to have kind of been mentored by him for as long as I have.
Stop lying, Tom. You have not been mentored by Bill Belichick. You've been handled by Bill Belichick. He's presided over you, and he's utilized your gifts to make sure that he can optimize what he brings to the table. But me and you both know that he has not mentored you. He's handled you. It's a big difference. A mentor is someone who actually cares about your well-being. I don't think that Bill Belichick cares about anybody's well-being.
You know, not many players have been able to be coached by the greatest coach of all time, and I have. And I think I'm very lucky to be able to have that.
Let me say this very quickly before they start. Do I believe that Bill Belichick is the greatest coach in NFL history? No, because I'm not quite sure that there is such a thing. I think that people are a product of what came before them. Like, for example, when I state who I believe are the greatest players in NBA history, of course, we all know that in a real evaluation, we have to go according to eras. So that's why I like to go based upon impact. And when we're going to evaluate the history of NFL coaches based upon impact, I have to say that the most impactful coach in the history of the NFL is Mr. Paul Brown.
All right, that was Brady on WEEI yesterday. Stephen A., is he right about Bill Belichick being the greatest coach of all time?
No, he's not. Here's how I feel about it. Let me explain. The greatest coach of all time. Let me explain.
Now, Ryan just asked who's better. Once again, I believe that Paul Brown is greater in regards to his impact and his influence. For those of you who don't know who Paul Brown was, he was a coach of the Cleveland Browns back in the 50s and 60s. And even before that, he coached some professional football franchises. But what he brought to the game, if you've ever seen any documentaries on Paul Brown, he was the coach who assisted in, quote-unquote, integrating the NFL. He brought in prominent players like Marion Motley. For those of you who don't know who Marion Motley was, he was a dominant NFL running back during the 1950s, so-called black man, about 6'3", 230, 240 pounds. Used to straight steamroll dudes. He could dominate today, no problem. Of course, he also drafted the great Jim Brown. Paul Brown, if I remember correctly, he brought into the NFL the quarterback pocket, the draw play, a lot of the offensive strategies that would later on be used in the quote-unquote modern era. A lot of his more prominent assistant coaches, like the great Bill Walsh, Weeb Ewbank. When you go through the NFL coaching tree, it all goes back to Paul Brown. Bill Belichick came from Bill Parcells. Bill Parcells coached under Ray Perkins. Ray Perkins coached under the great Don Shula, and Don Shula coached under the great Paul Brown. So it all goes back to Paul Brown. Bill Walsh coached under the great Paul Brown. And we all know the Bill Walsh coaching tree is very vast and very relevant in today's NFL. Mike Holmgren coached under Bill Walsh. For those of you brothers who remember, Mike Holmgren was the coach of the Green Bay Packers during the 1990s. He's the one who brought Brett Favre into prominence. And then under Mike Holmgren, you had John Gruden. Under Paul Brown, you also had Weeb Ewbank, who coached the, if I remember correctly, the New York Jets in the late 60s when they had Joe Namath. And Buddy Ryan, the designer of the 46 defense, coached under Weeb Ewbank. So once again, it all goes back to Paul Brown.
Bill Belichick does not get to have those laudables attached to him. And we ignore Spygate, and we ignore Deflategate. That was never associated with Bill Walsh. It was never associated with Bill Belichick. There's 4 Super Bowl titles that a coach by the name of Chuck Noll, registered in Pittsburgh. You should remember that. Okay.
That's right. Chuck Noll also was on the Paul Brown coaching tree. Since Stephen A. Smith mentioned Chuck Noll was a direct assistant coach of Paul Brown. And as we all know, Chuck Noll was the coach of that great Pittsburgh Steelers team, the most dominant, the most talented team in the history of the NFL, the 1970s Pittsburgh Steelers. I believe they had the most Hall of Famers of any team in the history of the NFL. Their 1974 draft is probably the greatest draft in NFL history. They drafted John Stallworth, Lynn Swann, Mike Webster, and I believe they also drafted Jack Ham as well. Either Jack Ham or Jack Lambert, but one of you brothers can correct me on that. But their 1974 draft was unbelievable. And once again, Chuck Noll was an assistant under Paul Brown. Paul Brown also brought into prominence the practice squad as well. A lot of the techniques that NFL teams use today were brought into play by Mr. Paul Brown. The playbook, things of that nature. Paul Brown was something else. He was also known for being an extreme control freak, as most highly intellectual people are. Bill Walsh stated, and I watched this on an NFL documentary, Bill Walsh stated that Paul Brown proactively tried to stop him from gaining coaching jobs in the NFL. This was on a documentary about Bill Walsh on the NFL Network. So sometimes people can become overly controlling to the point where they become megalomaniacal, unfortunately. And I also think that Bill Belichick suffers from that issue as well. Sometimes certain prominent head coaches start to believe that their assistant coaches should be their perpetual vassals, their perpetual serfs. And they're scared that their assistant coach will go to another team and take what they learned from that head coach and outdo the head coach, and their legacy will be greater than the head coach.
I said Chuck Noll. Okay. I said Chuck Noll, all right? So not only is that a reality, we also think about the modifications in the game that have changed how the game has been altered, how softened, how soft the game has become compared to what it used to be.
And now that I think of it, I also believe that the great Tom Landry also came from the Paul Brown coaching tree. But if I'm wrong about that, one of you brothers can correct me.
Then we also have to take into account the fact that you have Tom Brady. Now, you have 5 Super Bowl championships. You have 8 Super Bowl appearances. I get all of that. We bring in Deflategate and Spygate. We can't ignore that. We also have to take into account there was a 10-year gap from 2004 to 2014 where the New England Patriots didn't win a Super Bowl. Twice they lost to your New York Giants. Let's remember that. Twice they lost.
Well, they won it twice.
Yes.
It's really hard to not interrupt you right now.
Well, I'm just saying, not only did you go 10 years without it, but again, here's where I get everybody. You see,
let me cut off Stephen A. for a moment, because the Patriots have gone 10 years without winning a Super Bowl. But let's also understand that I believe in 06, was it? The Indianapolis Colts had that unbelievable comeback against them in Indianapolis. 07, they had that 16-0 team that lost to the New York Giants in the Super Bowl. 08, Tom Brady got hurt. 09, I'm trying to remember exactly what happened. I believe that's the year that Peyton Manning lost to the New Orleans Saints. I remember that the Patriots lost in 2012 to the Giants, and in 2013, I believe they lost to the Denver Broncos in the playoffs. In 2014, they beat Seattle. In 2015, they lost to the Denver Broncos again, because that's the year that Denver beat Carolina. So every year they've been right there. They've pretty much been right there. The issue with Belichick is also going to be that he's had to coach the great Tom Brady. So this partnership that they've had is very similar to the NBA partnership of Tim Duncan and Greg Popovich, where we're not quite sure exactly who was the prime mover there, and we're never going to know. And Tom Brady is going to make sure that people are never going to know who the prime mover was, because he understood that if Bill Belichick was allowed to move him, like it's very clear Bill Belichick wanted to do, and bring in Jimmy Garoppolo, there was a very good chance that Bill Belichick would win a Super Bowl without Tom Brady and be able to take a lot of credit away from Tom Brady.
At some point in time, you got to ask yourself this question. How much credit are you going to give to Tom Brady? And how much credit are you going to give to Bill Belichick? Now, if there is no Tom Brady, you got a point. Like, for example, with anybody, as much as we respect Terry Bradshaw, because Terry Bradshaw obviously was a 4-time Super Bowl champion, is he ever mentioned in the equation as the greatest quarterback ever or anything? Nobody talks about him like that.
Well, maybe it's because when he was a rookie, Terry Bradshaw had something like 6 touchdowns and 24 interceptions or some shit like that. That man had a terrible rookie season.
No one has ever talked about him like that. But Chuck Noll and the Pittsburgh Steelers found a way to do these things. Bill Walsh, even though we talk about Joe Montana, we talked about how he reinvented the game of football, for crying out loud.
Absolutely, the West Coast offense, which pretty much is still ran by most teams in the NFL today to some degree. Of course, there have been alterations and innovations in that offense, but most of the teams in the NFL are still running the West Coast offense.
Bill Parcells won Super Bowls with Jeff Hostetler and Phil Simms. We got to think about stuff like that.
That's very true. And Bill Parcells is probably the most underrated coach in NFL history. But we also have to understand that Bill Parcells was able to win Super Bowls with a team that was not privy to a lot of the free agency rights and activities that are so prevalent in today's NFL. So we do have to take that into account. It makes it a little bit easier to win a couple of Super Bowls if you're Bill Parcells when you have the greatest defensive player in the history of the NFL in Lawrence Taylor, and another Hall of Fame linebacker in Carl Banks. For those of us who remember that Giants team, that defense, particularly in 91, they had a cornerback by the name of Mark Collins, who may be one of the most underrated cornerbacks in the history of the NFL. People talk about Deion Sanders versus Jerry Rice. There was no cornerback in the NFL that defended Jerry Rice better than Mark Collins. I remember watching NFL Monday Night Football games as a kid when they would almost always have the Giants against the 49ers on a Monday night. This was back when Monday Night Football was a huge event. Like, people who watch Monday Night Football now may not quite get the gist of it because they've kind of taken the onus off of Monday Night Football and put it on Sunday Night Football. But back in the 80s and 90s, Monday Night Football was the biggest event. They didn't care about Sunday Night Football back then. Monday Night Football will have the biggest matchup of the week. And the 49ers will play the Giants almost every year in the regular season. And Mark Collins will customarily hold Jerry Rice to 1 or 2 catches in the game. Like, he was an incredible cornerback for a few years. And he guarded Jerry even better than Deion Sanders did.
Bill Belichick is elite. He is great. I have no denials. But Spygate, Deflategate, Tom Brady.
Hey, you ain't trying.
I'm not mad at him. We just
Brian,
talking about greatest ever.
Molly, clear out for a second.
Right.
Sure.
I want this man right now on this.
Please. About time. It took you 2 years. Let's go. Let's go.
I'm not ignoring Inflategate or Deflategate or
Inflategate.
Spygate.
This fool said Inflategate.
I'm not ignoring either one.
He said Inflategate. Go ahead.
I'm not ignoring
Go
it.
ahead.
I'm including those things,
Ooh.
including those scandals. Bill Belichick is still the greatest who ever did it by so much it's not even worth the conversation, but apparently you want to have it.
Huh?
Stephen A., every single rule. This is not the Cowboys or the Steelers back in the day. Every single rule that has been implemented since then has been done so with the design, with the intention of making what Bill Belichick has done impossible. Every single rule is to stop dynasties.
That's an excellent argument, Max Kellerman. An excellent argument. We do have to factor in the fact that Bill Belichick has been extremely successful in an era where the NFL has proactively tried to legislate against dynasties. I think to their detriment, and I think that they're going to realize the importance of dynasties after the New England Patriots finally fade off into oblivion. Because fans are able to latch on to dynasty psychologically, whether you're a fan of the dynasty or you're against the dynasty. You want to see that dynastic rule fall. And I think that the NFL has gone too far with this parity. I've stated this in other videos. And I think that they're going to have to reel it back especially after Bill Belichick and Tom Brady are gone, and they realize the importance of having that boogeyman in your professional sports league. It's very helpful for fans to identify with greatness, whether they like that team or they dislike that team. But once again, Max Kellerman makes a very valid point. The only thing that I'll say to contradict that is that it's very difficult to grasp exactly how successful or how great Bill Belichick has been in an era where they have legislated against dynasties, when you have, if not the greatest quarterback ever, on most people's list, he's going to be no lower than number 2, maybe at the lowest number 3, but I don't even see him dropping that low. Me personally, I think that Joe Montana is the greatest quarterback I've ever seen. But I will put Tom Brady number 2, if for no other reason than his achievements.
Increase parity. Make sure that every town feels like they have a chance every year. And Bill Belichick, in spite of all of those restraints, big constraints, is basically in the Super Bowl every other year, and he wins half of those over a 2-decade span. And when he didn't have, and by the way,
say something.
with Tom Brady,
I'm so annoyed right now.
With Tom Brady, you say, well, look, he has this great quarterback.
Right.
What do you think? Tom Brady would have been a great quarterback anywhere. You think he would have been?
I think that there are certain quarterbacks that we can say would have been great anywhere. Dan Marino would have been great anywhere. John Elway would have been great anywhere, because they basically came out of the box, no assembly required. Tom Brady was a 6th-round draft pick. He needed someone to believe in him. I'm not quite sure that he would have been great anywhere. I think that he would have been capable anywhere. But he needed to be on a team with a coach that could create schemes for him to be successful early on, until he finally grew into who he became. Now, John Elway or Dan Marino, you can put them anywhere. They're going to be Hall of Fame quarterbacks because they have Hall of Fame talent. Tom Brady has a Hall of Fame mind, and it took him a while for that mind to fully gestate.
This without Bill Belichick? How was Sam? How was Cassell? How was
Matt Castle.
Matt Castle. I'm trying to say Sam Cassell. How was Matt Castle?
How was Jimmy Garoppolo when he filled in?
Yeah, but he was 5-0 in San Francisco too. Matt Castle was 11
With
and
Tom Shanahan.
Matt Castle
won 2 games with Bill Belichick. Two. He won 2 games with Bill Belichick. That's what Molly bringing up.
Matt
But I'll deal with you in a
Castle
second.
was
Go ahead.
11 and 5. What did he do after Belichick? The point is that in every single way you can measure this, Bill Belichick is not only the greatest NFL coach of all time, he is the greatest football coach of all time.
I want to hear what
It
Ryan
is
and Molly
not
have to say, because your
close.
argument is
Just
not
say one
moving
thing.
me a
I
little
just
bit.
need to
I'll
say
give
one
it
thing,
to-
okay?
Please.
Yeah, I have to put Paul Brown as the number 1 coach in the history of professional football. I mean, this guy took the helmets from leather helmets to real helmets with face masks. He invented face masks. Like, pretty much what we're watching today is the brainchild of Paul Brown.
Both of
First
y'all.
of all, the Spygate is a legit argument, right? If you're filming people's practices, etc. Deflategate?
Well, Spygate is not just a legit argument. I mean, if we really want to go there, that's an argument that could condemn a coach. Bill Belichick is lucky to still be allowed to coach in the NFL after that. And am I saying that he's the only coach that films the other team's practices? Most likely not. But for a person who gets so much credit for being super intelligent, he was dumb enough to get caught doing it, especially in Super Bowls. And when we look back at all the Super Bowls that the Patriots have been involved in, they basically all came down to the last possession. And one can certainly make the case that had the Patriots not knew what the opposing team was going to run early on, the outcomes of those games may have been very different. When a field goal is what decides victories over the Rams and over the Panthers, if I remember correctly, over the Eagles, who knows what may have happened had they not been involved in some type of cheating scandal.
Stephen A. Smith, do you know what that
discussing with
is?
you.
That's
She's
deflating football.
she's
How's that
discussing
on
with
Bill Belichick? That's on Tom Brady to make himself.
Just tell me when y'all want me to take all of y'all on. I'm just letting you talk.
He's right. Other people over.
He's not right. He's not right.
And people just.
He's not
That
right.
has nothing to do with Belichick.
Watch.
She's really disgusted with you right
So?
now. First off, Max,
Don't you
you're
realize I
absolutely-
don't care? Have y'all not figured that out? It doesn't bother me about
Well, the main reason why Molly Karam is so disgusted by Stephen A. Smith right now is because she's a big Tom Brady fan. But if we want to go there with the Deflategate issue, how did the Patriots lose their Super Bowl last season? Or how was their loss sealed? It was sealed by a Tom Brady fumble. Who knows, if he was still allowed to deflate the football down to his specifications, he may not have fumbled that football. So that's how important it is to pay attention to those little scandals, because they can be the difference between a victory or a defeat, especially for a team in the Patriots who, every time they're involved in a Super Bowl, it comes down to the last drive, the last possession.
I don't know that. To the people that are correct.
Good. He's
And
a
right
little
now,
hater.
I'm talking to the right.
Really?
Okay.
Stay over here on the left.
Blasphemy.
100%, you are absolutely correct. There are things done in today's football to create parity. Every team needs to have a chance. This is why the Super Bowl moves around now, because they want every team to feel like they have an opportunity to host a Super Bowl and play in it at the same time. Bill Belichick has totally destroyed that. This team, every single year when you come into the season, you think the New England Patriots are the favorite to represent the AFC in the Super Bowl. Every single time. It's because he can adjust each and every week to be the best team on the field. If it's Tom Brady that needs to throw the ball, he does that. If you need to run the ball because the team is lacking defensively, he does that. If you need to rush a quarterback, if it's a blitz game, it's just a game you have to play zone. Bill Belichick recreates himself every single Sunday.
And no other coach, there's no way.
And he deserves a great amount of credit for that. That's why I love the comparison between Bill Belichick and Greg Popovich, because Popovich is in the same thing. From the time that he started coaching in the late 90s all the way through the 2000s, we've seen how he has changed with the times. And that truly is what has proved that Popovich as well as Belichick are great coaches. Now, one of the condemnations of Paul Brown is that he was very hesitant to change with the times, but that was near the end of his coaching career. For a person who was such a trailblazer and an innovator like a Paul Brown was all throughout the 40s and 50s, I'm not going to castigate him too much for being overly recalcitrant by the end of his career, because it's very common for old men to become curmudgeonly as they see the end. So it is what it is. But I would still put him in regards to the most impactful and most influential coach above Bill Belichick.
No way. He's a different guy.
And no other coach.
It's three of y'all. Do I get a chance to respond? Because I got a lot to say, y'all. Ain't nobody hiding now.
I mean, you said a lot of nothing earlier.
I had a lot of nothing. I said nothing. I made it up. What did I make up? What did I say? What did I say? What did I say that wasn't factual?
You're one of the smartest people I know. And the fact that
Don't lie to him.
and the fact that you're on the other side, the fact that you're on the other side, the fact that you're on the other side of this discussion disappoints me.
Okay.
And I don't like
that.
Bill Belichick.
I appreciate that. I'm sorry to disappoint you. I'm
Disappoint me.
I'm sorry, my brother. I'm sorry.
He's the greatest coach of all time.
I'm sorry. Molly, I'm so sorry. I disappointed
I
wanna
you
hear this
too.
defense.
First of all, let me
You're
go.
still mad about Malcolm Butler.
Time out. I am.
Yeah.
That is true.
Yeah,
But that's not that. That has nothing to do with this, because I've called Bill Belichick one of the greatest ever. I called him the greatest of this generation. I'm not denying his greatness. The question is to whether or not he's the greatest ever in my mind, and I say no. I'm gonna go down the list. First to you. You sit up there and you say all about nothing. I respectfully disagree with that. We sit up there and we look at Bill Belichick, right? I bring up Deflategate. I'll go to you and Molly on this one. You know why Deflategate matters?
Why?
What were they doing fumble-wise when the balls were deflated? And then what did they do the following year when it came to fumbles? Look up the numbers. I won't bother you with it. When you have deflated...
Don't you remember the game?
Great point, Stephen A. Smith. And as I've already stated once again, how was the Philadelphia Eagles' victory in last season's Super Bowl cemented? It was cemented by a Tom Brady fumble.
Time out. Don't give me a game. They play 16 plus 2 playoff games plus a Super Bowl. Stop it, Molly.
Yeah, but that doesn't have to do with
Molly, you're giving me one game. I'm telling you, it is a fact that statistically they struggled with holding on to the football more after Deflategate than before.
Hold on. I have a question about that. Is your argument, because
That was just one.
Molly Karam stated, what about all the people on steroids? What the hell does that have to do with the price of tea in China? Right now, we're evaluating Bill Belichick and if he's actually the greatest coach of all time. Stephen A. Smith's contention is that he cannot be because of Spygate, and he also threw in Deflategate. So I'm guessing that even if he believes that Bill Belichick may not have known about Deflategate, that it was done on his watch. So he's going to use that to penalize Bill Belichick. I think that Bill Belichick is definitely in the top 3 greatest coaches in the history of the NFL. But just because of the amount of innovations that Paul Brown has made to contribute to what we know today as modern NFL football, I have to put him at number 1.
Was one of them.
Yeah, it's this argument that because Molly seems to be saying whatever the efficacy of the cheating was, he could do it without cheating too.
Right.
What I'm saying is
Well, that's speculative. And the reason why that has to be purely based in speculation is, once again, all of the New England Patriots Super Bowl victories and defeats came down pretty much to the last drive. So once it gets revealed that you're utilizing something like Spygate, where basically you know what your opposing team is going to run on their first 3 drives or what they have mapped out to run on their initial drive in a football game, that's going to give you a decided advantage. Because if you're able to stop a St. Louis Rams football team, which is known as one of the great offenses of all time, any drive stop that you're able to get is a big bonus, and it's going to result in a higher probability for you to win at the end of the game. That's just the fact of the matter.
is your issue that the cheating helped or that he is simply a cheater?
No, I'm saying.
Well, in response to Max Kellerman's question to Stephen A. Smith of whether or not he believes that Bill Belichick is simply a cheater, Aristotle stated that we are what we repeatedly do. So whatever you repeatedly do is indicative of who you are as a person. If you constantly cheat, that means you're a cheater. If you constantly lie, that means you're a liar. So the question is, how often does Bill Belichick cheat? He's been caught with Spygate. How many other infractions can we attribute to him? That's the real question, to establish whether or not he's someone who simply got caught cheating in a big way or if he's a big cheater.
Saying that cheating helped. I would not do that to him because I know how great of a coach he is, which I've been on the record stating that. We're talking about the greatest ever. We're not questioning the greatness of Bill Belichick. We're only questioning it in comparison to the great ones throughout NFL history. That is the discussion. Secondly, you talk about Tom Brady. Tom Brady brings what he brings to the table. Bill Belichick, before he was a head coach, what was he? Wasn't he a defensive coordinator?
Yeah.
It's a signature.
Champion for the Giants.
Last year, they were 30th. 30th against the pass, 29th against Tony Young. So if you get to a Super Bowl, if you get to a Super Bowl, why would that be? Could it not be because of Tom Brady? Could it not be? Because the defense...
He had a bad defense listen.
Well, let me say this. Stephen A. Smith is making great factual points. The only thing that I will say in defense of Bill Belichick is that when you're unable to acquire great talent in the draft because your team is going 13-3 every season, of course, you're going to have issues with your defense. There's only so much that you can coach up low-level talented players. And because you have a Tom Brady, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to draft high on the defensive end. They can't even bring in high-level offensive players because, once again, they're going 13-3, 14-2 every year because Tom Brady is so proficient. So not only are they suffering from a talent perspective on defense, they're also suffering on offense. The difference is that on defense, they don't have a standout player to hide a lot of their deficiencies. So it truly is a wonder that they're as good as they are every year with the fact that they cannot recruit or bring in high talent players. So I have a hard time coming down on Belichick over that issue. But I understand where Stephen A. Smith is coming from.
Listen, let me tell you why. It's not about 1 year. I got a whole bunch of numbers here. Tell you several years since 2004 that they've had
Was he a great defensive
coordinator? You're saying Max said that Tom Brady would beat Tom Brady anywhere. Nobody knew that.
But listen,
did you see Tom Brady?
He said that.
I agree with you, Ryan. I don't agree with Max Kellerman on that one. I cannot state unequivocally that Tom Brady would be the same player everywhere. I just don't agree with that.
Say that for him. I'm zeroing in on you. Because see, you're not only a Super Bowl champion, you are a Super Bowl champion playing defense. And I ask you a simple question. If your defense is that porous, and there have been several times they have been in the last decade, who came to the rescue? That would be Tom Brady, who came to the rescue. Now, I understand that you might be a little bit touched because you have suffered at the hands of New England in your career. But the flip side to it is this. It was Tom Brady doing you damage, not Bill Belichick. And you know I'm telling the truth. He's done to you. Here's the deal. Max Kellerman, you sit up there and you talk about he's the greatest by far, but you want to include Spygate. You want to include Deflategate.
That takes him down to only twice as good.
So you're arguing.
Max Kellerman is the captain of hyperbole. Everybody that Max Kellerman thinks is the greatest is not just the greatest, they're the greatest by far, by an infinite margin. If someone is truly greater than everyone else by an infinite margin, they should never, ever lose. Ever. So a lot of his assertions, they make no sense whatsoever. And they run contrary to his credo that he's a person of logic and rationale. If you're truly a person of logic and rationale, then it will behoove you to stay within the realms of reality.
Argument is that, excuse me, giving yourself an unfair advantage with Tom Brady as your quarterback, which is already an unfair advantage. Okay, you're trying to tell me
I'm
Really?
tell you what I'm telling you. Okay? I'm telling you that he is so much better than anyone who ever did it.
I think he's
that
phenomenal.
those things do take him down several levels to 10 times the level
I
anyone
think,
else
I
is
think
on.
he's phenomenal in this generation. But I'm telling you right now, when you think about a Bill Parcells, who was like a mentor to him, I'd give Bill Parcells an A.
What did Parcells do without Bill Belichick as a key coordinator? He ever win a Super Bowl?
He lied to me. He doesn't deserve credit for that.
The fact that you pointed.
Bill Parcells has actually had moderate success without Bill Belichick on his staff. Remember, he had that season in Dallas where the team was 13-3, and unfortunately for them, they kind of flamed out in the playoffs. But Bill Parcells does not need to have his legacy tied to Bill Belichick. Bill Parcells deserves his own level of coaching accolades. There's no doubt about that.
Pointed to, from 2004 to 2014, they didn't win the Super Bowl. So how?
No, I wasn't talking about just winning the Super Bowl.
What I'm saying is this, though. The fact that you have to point that out, and they went to Super Bowls during that time, that's why he's the greatest.
Season.
That's why he's the greatest. Because that's what you have to use
Bill
against him.
Belichick is a phenomenal coach. We're talking about the greatest of all time.
In the hardest era to be a dynasty and the greatest dynasty of all time.
Who's better?
I told you, for me personally, I'd give you Walsh and Parcells ahead of them.
Walsh
right
and
there.
Lombardi are the only two in the conversation, and not really the conversation.
All right.
Well, not quite just Walsh and Lombardi, also Paul Brown. I will put Bill Belichick on that same level as Walsh and Lombardi, but I will put Paul Brown above all of them because of his innovations. Most of the innovations that Bill Walsh brought to the table, many of them started as a seed that were planted in his mind by Paul Brown.
Okay. It's time to go. Ryan, you'll be back with us a little later. Good times. LeBron.
But anyway, that's basically it on that. I thought that this was a very good conversation, particularly since it was very clear to me that Tom Brady was just playing the good company man as usual. So peace.